Someone said that frickin' Panera's Pepsi's taste funny.
Better.
No, I mean,
What? Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Average Intelligence Podcast. Finally, as promised, I will be reacting to Candace Owens on Jubilee's Surrounded, very much like the Jordan Peterson video, except this time I have not watched it ahead of time. So you will see my reactions in real time. So without further ado, no preamble other than this podcast tonight is brought to you by our friends at the Spur of the Moment podcast and RTA Media. If you have an idea for a podcast, stay tuned and you will find out how to get in touch. So let's dive into Candace Owens being surrounded.
My first claim is that the sexual revolution has devalued women and made them infinitely less happy.
So my question for you is, statistics show that 60% of women who are murdered by their intimate partners, murdered by someone that they are in close relations with.
So I'm not saying that's wrong at all. I would just be curious to see the statistics of, because if memory serves, I don't know that it's 60%, but I do think that statistically just about anyone is more likely to be murdered by someone that they know, because murder is often, I'm not going to say always, but often murder is a crime that's partially due to association, whether it be a crime of passion or a crime of revenge, something like that. So I'd just be curious to see the statistic, because if the rate of murder against women is significantly higher than the general population, then this point is stronger than it seems at face value.
Yeah.
So how is it that, women are so valued, quote unquote, in the home, and yet that's the place where they're at the most danger?
Okay, so I'm not sure what that has to do with the sexual revolution.
Right, the sexual revolution.
I also don't know, I don't think her claim ever said, sorry, let me rephrase. That statistic does not mean that a woman is at the highest risk in the home. You would need more information to substantiate that claim.
Claim.
The sexual revolution gave.
I'm happy to answer it. I'm just saying that, if you broaden that statistic, you
Sure.
are more likely in general just to be murdered by somebody you know. So, of course.
But men are much less likely to be murdered by, their
That's not
partners.
true.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I'm sure, because men are less likely to be murdered by women. Full stop.
Yeah,
exactly. So that statistic makes sense to me. I'm still not sure how this correlates to whether or not
the sexual revolution increased women's ability to leave the house, women's ability to control their own reproductive capabilities, women's ability to, control their own capacity within the workforce in regards to their own sexual capacity. So it is the very fact that the sexual revolution happened that made our access to the workplace much more, or just the public sphere in general, much more easy.
I should have said at the outset, this is probably going to be a mistake on my part. When it comes to things like feminism, it's not something that I generally concern myself with overly, mostly because we've already, it's not a new idea, and we've already seen, positive outcome from the movement in terms of equality. But what I do find, and where I do tend to speak up, is when you just have bad arguments. And this is a really bad argument because it simultaneously paints a very one-dimensional picture and suffers from the, correlation equals causation sort of fallacy, because what she's saying is, as far as I can tell, a true statement, right? But I don't think that was as much the sexual revolution as Jordan Peterson pointed this out. I think it's less the sexual revolution and more about just advances in, how do I say this without sounding like a man, but I can't help it, but basically both in terms of medicine and with, I'm just not going to sugarcoat it, feminine hygiene products. You know, the ability to be able to exit the house while you are menstruating. I, again, this is pure speculation, but I would probably venture to guess that that may have had a bigger role. Certainly, the sexual revolution in the form of the birth control pill did, allow further access insofar as, a woman can now control her reproduction, right? So that's not nothing, but it's not everything.
So you think that, just so I'm trying to understand your argument here, you think that if we didn't have the sexual revolution, less women or more women would be murdered? Are you saying that women are
more women would be murdered for sure?
Okay, I disagree with that. I still don't think it has anything.
Again, it's just a bad argument. Not to say that I'm not even going to say that she has a point, but maybe because it's just incomplete information. But as much as I hate to say this, because I'm not a Candace Owens fan, she's doing a good job at picking apart the argument here.
To do with the claim that women are infinitely less happy because of the sexual revolution, which has devalued
I think
women.
you'd probably be less happy if you're being murdered.
Oh.
Anyone disagree?
Okay, yeah, I don't, okay. Okay. There is definitely a correlation between personal relationships and domestic violence. And just to be clear, if we're talking about just like monogamous relationships, the most violent relationships that are on the books are between lesbian partners. Yes, when people are intimate,
that's not a true
that is actually true.
No, the statistic you're talking about is people who have faced domestic violence. Lesbians, yes, are more likely to have faced domestic violence, but that's because they typically came from relationships with men in which they were mistreated.
Lesbian relationships are the most violent relationships that we have on the books.
But we can move on.
They can fact check that claim.
I've heard that stat before. I've never been able to substantiate it, but I do think that was a good clarification on the part of Candace is no, that according to her, they are specifically talking about a lesbian relationship at the time of that relationship being between two women. And that's a very important distinction in this case. Like I said, cannot substantiate, but I have heard that statistic before from different sources and not even in this context.
Point being is that it's not exactly a stunning statistic to say that when people are in relationships, period, whether those relationships are homosexual, whether they're married,
you're saying that the sexual revolution.
Let me finish. I've let you try to explain how this is correlated to happiness, and I don't think it does. I actually think you're having a different debate right now. But yes, absolutely, it makes perfect sense that you are more likely in general when you are in a relationship because people are driven by anger by people that they know, whether or not we're talking about boyfriend and girlfriend, girlfriend and girlfriend, a husband and a wife, a husband and a husband, or a wife and a wife. Yes, of course, the instances of domestic violence are going to take place when you're inside of a home. But the sexual revolution, encouraging women to give up their goods for free, which is what I'm speaking about, and encouraging men not to marry these women or to have long-term relationships, what I am saying is a direct contributor to their unhappiness because women are giving up their goods for free and women are now entering the workplace and that does not actually make them happy.
Okay, pause. Sorry, you've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
So Candace just did something that I see, to be fair, I've seen her do it before, but a lot of people do this and they are so fixated on their argument, and it's easy to fall for this because you're focused on the debate at hand. But when you're making an argument, you should also consider the parts that your argument isn't saying. So like right there, when Candace is talking about um, domestic violence being more likely because you're in a relationship. I mean, that's definitionally true because for it to be domestic violence, it has to be, in a domestic partnership setting, right? That's definitionally the case. But the way she describes it is making it sound like it's not a solid argument in favor of marriage at all because she's kind of just matter of factly being like, well, yeah, I mean, you're going to be more likely to have, have violence in a domestic setting. It's like, well, I don't think you're meaning to say that, but that's what it's coming across. So you got to be careful, and it's hard to do. It's hard to do in the moment. I understand. That's why, like I said in the Jordan Peterson video, it's perfectly okay to take a beat. You don't have to constantly be talking. Take a beat, think about what you're going to be saying, and then go for it. And of course, you can always clarify and retract. It's not a sin.
would you consider yourself a feminist, I'm assuming?
Queer feminist. There's variations, right?
What is a queer feminist as opposed to a feminist, just so I understand?
Well, so I heavily believe in queer theory. So, the gender binary that we understand, it comes from colonization. So someone who is mixed race, family from Mexico, we have the Muxés in Mexico, which is an indigenous tribe. They believed in gender fluidity. And then you have European colonizers coming who dismantle that. And now everything that we understand when it comes to gender is a Western lens. So from a queer...
So you don't even think women exist, I'm guessing.
I think everyone should be empowered to figure out their identity and explore the language that best describes themselves. So freedom, America, right? America, freedom. And
You probably saw my face. I want to finish listening to the idea before I comment on it.
I want to believe in that when it comes to identity. Right. Everyone should have the freedom to decide how they want to identify, as long as they're not causing harm. But that's where we get into the debate, what is harm?
So just, again, to be clear, to go back to this claim, we are debating female happiness. Mm-hmm. You are saying you do not identify as a female.
I identify with all gender expressions, so from masculinity to femininity. So
I'm just saying... Are you just saying that as a part of queer theory, you're debating whether or not women are happier after the sexual revolution? I'm just trying to understand, because it seems like you're debating queer theory as opposed to female.
I believe all genders benefit from the sexual revolution.
I wouldn't mind being in that hot seat, but I would frustrate people. So if I were debating or even having a conversation with this person, like... It's just, there's so many ideas bouncing around, and there's such abstract concepts that, like, in theory, yes, you could, I guess in theory, you could link patriarchy to colonialism, but that's a stretch. Citing one small group of people does not prove your overall point. And the problem is you're making very definitive statements about an area that even you are arguing is subjective, right? So it's really loosey-goosey argument, and that's the problem I have with both subjective morality and even subjective ideas when it comes to things like, and I know that the discussion was about gender, right? But and as much as people on sort of the pro-trans activism side will say sex and gender are not the same thing, but a lot of the times, case in point, like you have to consider what your argument is not saying directly, but saying indirectly. A lot of the language that I've seen some people, not all, some people use points to, and some have even actually come out and said it, to the point that some people do believe that sex is malleable. And even if they don't come out and say that directly, their arguments are at least indicative of that. And that then becomes problematic because there is biological objective truth. Now, listen, like I'm a broken record on this podcast and others. In terms of the subjectivity of how you identify in your life is really none of my business. But there is, there's biological truth here. And if you're going to argue in a logical or particularly medical, but in this sort of discussion where the topic at hand is inherently gendered because we're talking about feminism, it doesn't serve your argument well to be overly subjective. That's the only thing I'm talking about.
Hello.
I'm Zena.
Zena, very much like your name.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Zena was the girl who was making having a very good conversation with Jordan Peterson in the previous video. So this should actually be interesting.
Nice to meet you.
Can we start with the beginning? Do you identify as a female?
I identify as a woman, yeah.
Okay.
Right. So I do want to get back to your premise. You're saying that women have been devalued, right, by the sexual revolution. This kind of presumes two things. One, that there has been a loss of worth, right, for women. So you're saying that women have as human beings, lost worth. Women who, prior to their sexual revolution, were worth more than women today.
I would say that, yes, women have devalued themselves by becoming overtly
According to
sexual. That's my claim. So
Oh, okay, Xena bringing the heat again. Wow, a very solid point, basically. And I didn't even consider this up until this point because again, I was entrapped by the idea of the debate. Xena's rocking it. So Candace's claim is subjective. And ironically, the claim does seem to put women in a less than three-dimensional frame. Um, because Xena's question is quite valid. Uh, According to who and by what metric? Because you could easily make the case that women today are more valued. I think if you look at employment statistics, compared to, it depends on when you're comparing it to also. But if you're comparing it to 1960s America, I'm pretty sure that you would see a higher female employment rate without going and checking, just pretty sure. And what's really interesting about this, though, and when it comes to female employment, is it's always very interesting. And not to say nobody talks about it, but it was very interesting how female employment wasn't an issue during the war, during the Second World War, when they needed people to work in munitions factories or just factories in general. They needed people to work, and a lot of men were conscripted or joined the military and were fighting overseas, whether it be in the Pacific or Europe. And it wasn't a problem then because there was a necessity. But then once we were in peacetime in the 1960s, then all of a sudden there was a bit of a cultural regression, or at least there was a perception of a cultural regression. Not having been alive in the 60s, I couldn't tell you, but it's a prevailing theme, right? But again, I think Candace's claim depends on what sort of lens you're looking at this through. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say that her limb that she's making the claim on is that women are devalued in terms of relationships and marriage because as she said, her claim is that women are, quote, giving it away for free. Um, but I'd also be curious. I think the overall rate of marriage is down though, but I could be wrong. That's a number I would have to look at. But again, that sort of presupposes that marriages were always a good idea, always voluntary, always without outside pressures, and always happy. And again, that's a very broad and it's too basic of a definition, I think, personally.
So are you saying, but you're saying that according to you, women have been devalued?
not according to me. According to the time in which people are getting.
Are you sure? Because it's kind of central to you. As you just said, you made the claim.
So you're saying there's no individual case in which a woman can feel, fulfilled without being tied to other people in the case of family?
I think there could be an exceptional case for everything. I think there are exceptional cases, but I think that if we all start trying to be the exception as opposed to recognizing the rule, which is that people in life are more fulfilled when they achieve a family unit and when they have children, women in particular, especially aspiring to children, then you are going to end up with a bunch of people who are unhappy because your job cannot replace the feeling of having a family.
So I wanted to touch on that little fact check that had just popped up. This is why I hate surveys. I've discussed it many, many times, usually in a political context. But again, I guarantee you, I will bet money that the survey that said that people who had career fulfillment, they interviewed a bunch of people in, high earning career fields where driven people typically go for. And then conversely, the one that, said overwhelmingly that married people with families were happier, I guaranteed they interviewed a bunch of married people with families for the most part. I, Unless you can survey all of a particular group, the results don't, I mean, they don't really mean anything because it's always your sample size, right? So I'm always very wary of surveys unless it's a very, very, very specific where you can get a decent sample size of the people and then you can extrapolate based on that. Like, we don't even do that for our awards, not solely based on voting because the sample is skewed, because some of our podcasts just have higher viewership, but it's not necessarily a reflection of overall quality. So we have, and frankly, that's why we have a representative republic or Democratic representative republic for our government, because pure democracy may or may not take into account other factors. It's too broad, basically.
I am fascinated by your claim that women have lost happiness since the sexual revolution, since the 1950s. Do you think that there is any tie to happiness and freedom, and happiness and choice?
That's an interesting thought that honestly I've had. Like I said, I don't really think about this stuff too much. Not that it's not important. I just tend to think about other things. But she brings up a very good point that, like I said, so conceptually, it's kind of like a gradation system. I've had this example be given in a different form, ironically, with Ben Shapiro's hierarchy of ideal parental structures. So I, again, if I were talking to her, I would make the case that yes, you're absolutely right. I think that a woman and a man, frankly, being free, woman or a man, frankly, having the freedom to choose to enter a marriage of their own accord is the ideal, right? That's the ideal of a. Now, there are, I'm not going to say problems, there are considerations, right? As someone who's been married in the past, there are outside forces that will affect you and you won't realize they're affecting you, but it is preferable than, say, an arranged marriage or getting married purely out of necessity, whether that be financial, living situation, children being involved, what have you. And that does tie directly into the sexual revolution, i.e., birth control. So, yes, I would actually agree with that point. I think that the freedom of choice is the gateway to the highest form of fulfillment, because you can make the choice to make, if Candace's claim is correct and that being in a marriage and having a family is the key to happiness, right? You would, at least the case I would make is, you would be the most happy if you were able to enter that situation on your own accord based on your own freedom.
Did you go to college?
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Did you?
Yes, I did. So you have a degree.
Absolutely.
Now, when you went to college, did you go to college because it was simply something that you wanted to do, or did you think that I have to go to college because in order to get a job, I have to have a college degree?
I went to college for art because I was fascinated with art.
Okay. It's just answering my question. Did you go to college? Was that the only reason you went to college, or did you think that I might want to do something in art, so I have to go to college, like for my career?
I went to school because I wanted to expand my horizons. I mean, I think that's why most people go to university.
No,
Why
so
did
that's
you
actually,
go?
That's actually not
Why
true.
did
A lot
you
of
go?
I went, and I think a lot of people go because there's a pressure.
Ooh, ooh, that went downhill so fast. Uh, I think Candace is about to make a really, 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 really bad point. Very bad point. I, wow. Um, and I also don't believe the other woman who simply went to school because she wanted to expand her horizons. I'm sure there was a societal pressure, but I don't know her. I can't speak to that. But Candace is about to make a really, really bad argument here. I wonder if I'm right. Because I think she's about to make the point that, you go to college because of a societal expectation. And I think she's going to tie that to marriage and children. And she's going to inadvertently make a case for not like culturally enforced monogamy in the form of culturally enforced marriage would be a better. Ooh, ooh, she's about to. Ooh, ooh. Let's watch.
a failure.
It's a choice. Everything's a choice. So taking away choices doesn't make people happier. Taking away freedom doesn't make people happier.
I'm disagreeing with you on the idea that people are feeling more free by financial pressure. I think financial pressure makes people feel remarkably less free.
So you want no bank accounts again? Women not to have credit cards?
I'm not saying that women shouldn't have access to credit cards or banking accounts. You're putting words in my mouth, so why don't you respond to the words that I'm saying?
Well, less financial pressure. If I don't have a bank account, that's a lot less financial pressure, I guess, right?
Financial pressure in terms of most people that go to college, and I'm counting myself among them, it's because typically in order to get the job that you're being sold is going to make you infinitely happier and infinitely more free, it just requires a college degree. And most of these people, to be clear, have to put themselves, the majority of people have to put themselves into debt. And I don't think anybody would describe debt as a form of freedom, right? I don't think anybody would realistically say...
Let's get back to happiness. So we're here to talk about happiness and how the sexual revolution, and we're not talking about college debt.
I think it's important because we're talking about freedom. You just said that the reason why I feel happy is because I have more freedom. And I am saying that financial restraints and debt doesn't make people feel more free.
So let's eliminate the debt. Let's eliminate college debt.
Okay, she hasn't quite made the point that I thought she was going to, but she's made an equally bad one. So I do always kind of chuckle at this. This doesn't go to necessarily saying that she's wrong, but it is always interesting to me when someone crafts an argument. I'm just going to use hers as an example. Her overall point is that women are happier with a husband and a family, right? But that situation is ultimately what the fulfillment and happiness is. But she keeps citing outside forces as examples to why one would do that and not choosing just the happiness and fulfillment part, because now debt is a pressure, or I'm sorry, financial pressures are now a reason to get married objectively, as opposed to just sticking to your point that you believe that women are more fulfilled and happier with a marriage and a family.
Not today. Oh, hi, Candace. How are you?
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I'm John. Okay, so I feel like a lot of your...
Get ready to have feminism mansplained to a woman. This is going to be fun.
Arguments today are very rooted in a sort of old school perspective, I have to be honest. Like, I think, and I'm not trying to be insulting
She's a conservative
whatsoever. I feel as though most people would identify that claim as pretty extreme and pretty like...
Children are extreme?
Well, no, that women would get more happiness inherently from raising kids than having a job or deciding what they want to do with their lives.
Why is that? I'm just curious. Why would having children, which is just a natural biological conclusion, be something that sounds extreme?
I just said inherently.
Well, inherently.
That's the
extreme.
inherent expectation.
Yeah.
That's better for...
It's inherent because it's biological. So I think when we think about things that are inherent, I think biology is a good thing to start with, right? So biologically speaking, men and women come together, they form families, and that's the reason why you're sitting here. That's the reason that I'm sitting here, is because biology is inherent.
Well,
so
I was
saying it's just natural order that we're speaking about, right?
Okay, let's break it down. So why do you believe that? Why do you believe that?
Why do I believe that women...
Why do you inherently are happier? Yeah.
Okay. You keep stressing this word inherent. So.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think because it speaks to natural order, and every piece of life, I think, is enriched by children.
You don't think it's natural for women to get to decide what they want to do with their lives?
I do not think that saying women can decide whether or not they want to go to work or have children is problematic. What I'm saying to you is that women will get the most fulfillment from having a family.
Because it's natural.
It's natural, but also children are wonderful and beautiful and spiritually divine creatures. I mean, they're amazing. There's everything about having a child. Yes, it's a lot of work. It's beautiful.
I hear that. Well,
Yeah.
Okay, what if there's a little girl born and it's her dream her entire life to be an author or to be, on TV or any of these things, and having children is very expensive. It takes a lot of time. So how is it better for that, and I understand this is hypothetical, but that hypothetical little girl to have children than to pursue these things that would make her happy as she gets older.
I just think that what if she publishes the book and she has a child, she would agree with me that the child was more fulfilling and made her happy. That's what I'm happier than the book did, is what I'm saying. And I say this as a published author of a New York Times. I would choose my children over my best-selling book. And I was that little girl who had a dream that, like, oh, it would be really great if I could share my thoughts and ideas in a book. But it is utter insanity for me to reflect on that and say that I would have rather published Blackout than to have my 3 children.
That right there is probably the main reason why I don't really touch on this topic too often, is because of what that guy did just there. His entire argument, particularly in the case of Candace, just got wrecked because he had to, and I love how whenever anybody's talking about, from both sides, whenever anybody's talking about this issue, they act like it's a one or it's all or nothing. Like, and they also don't ever really talk about men's desire to have a family or have children, at least in the context of this, is like they always act as though if a woman is not a mother, or I'm sorry, if a woman has a career, that she can't have children. Like, I never understood why this is a one size or one dimension. Like, you can only pick one. You can only pick one. Women do both all the time. It's the vast majority of cases. Now, it may not be their dream career, but there are also women who don't have children that don't have their dream career. So they're not, at least as far as I can see, they're not mutually exclusive. Like, and yes, I understand that particularly in really, really high earning career fields, being a mother will and can, and in some cases will, affect your advancement. But at the same time, there's study after study after study, and I remember what I said about statistics, right? But there's a lot of studies from a lot of different sample groups that show a trend of, this is not a universal statement, but there is a trend based on the data that shows that a lot of women, as they get older, if they're in these sort of, high power earning career fields, their priorities shift in their mid to late 30s. Just statistically, this is not a universal statement. And many of them have a desire to start a family in or around that time. So to me, it's kind of a waste of time to argue this case as though it's one or it's only one. There can be only one. The Highlander paradox.
Rather, you see what I'm saying?
It's not rather. I'm just saying
that's
that
your claim. That's your claim, is that it's better.
It will be more fulfilled. Yes.
Right. So rather.
Well, if it's an either or, if you're saying it's an either or, I'm just saying that if these two things have happened in your life, the thing that will bring you more spiritual fulfillment.
There it is. He's doing the either or thing, and I can't believe I'm siding with Candace Owens. I just can't believe it.
I think it's kind of funny because as someone who's anti-feminism, you practice it more than most women do. I mean, every time you get on your podcast, every time you collect a check, you're practicing feminism.
Okay, that's what you think.
No, that's what it is.
Actually,
because without feminism, you wouldn't be able to exist.
Yeah, people keep saying, I hate when people say that.
But it's just the
it
truth.
just shows that you haven't done the research to even understand where the feminism
or you don't know history,
which was discovered. That's what I'm saying about you, because it means that you don't understand that a bunch of government officials in the CIA funded the feminist movement. So for all of your hatred for the patriarchy,
I'm so confused.
And
so my question
men,
is it bad that they funded it or bad that it just happened?
There's also the problem that neither of them is touching on the fact that there are multiple waves of feminism. So I don't know of anyone who can logically say, like, for example, first wave feminism, suffrage, even second wave feminism. I don't think there are too many people that are going to argue that those were inherently bad things. I don't think anyone today could legitimately, I mean, there's people out there who believe this, but they won't be taken seriously. I don't think there's anybody out there today that would, in good faith, argue that, for example, women getting the right to vote is a bad thing. I don't think there is anybody out there who would legitimately argue that a true merit-based wage system would be a bad thing. I just don't think those people exist. And these two, Candace and then Cecilia, are both talking, at least I feel, are both talking. Well, Candace is talking about a specific, more contemporary form of feminism, and Cecilia is talking about feminism as a whole umbrella term, and that's why they're butting heads, I think.
When you look at stay-at-home mothers, you see that they're more likely to report being depressed. They're more likely to report having anxiety and anger and all these types of things. So how can you say that? Seems like a woman, if you want to get married and have kids, you should go to college and have a career.
So it sounds to me like we are looking at totally different statistics, because everything that you said, I've actually read the exact opposite.
I'm glad we're on a fact check show with you.
Right, exactly.
That's an odd thing to say, because thus far, and I do recommend, because this is snippets, right? I do recommend you watch the entire video, because as of this moment in the video, Candace's fact checks have been right the majority of the time, or at least more accurate. I'm not gonna lie to you. The CIA one, that actually shocked me. I did not know that. And I actually went back and double checked it to make sure I read it correctly like 3 times, because and it seems, or at least for that one, it seemed like everyone in the circle was operating under the opposite assumption. That was wild. So that's an interesting thing to say when Candace's fact checks have been more correct than the counterpoints.
Red report on female happiness, and I know that it was formally debunked, and it was.
That's not what I'm talking about. Pew Research,
Right.
University of
Okay.
California. In fact, working mothers today spend more time with their children than women did in the 1960s that were at home.
Okay, well, women that are at home are obviously spending more time with their children than the.
Yeah, that's just a logically untrue statement. If a woman, assuming it's an 8-hour workday, which some women have careers where they work more, and assuming full time, of course, that's just factually not true statistically. Now, there might be some people that carve out more time in the evenings, for example, because, and theoretically, if their kids are in school, right, it really doesn't matter if they're at work all day. But that's just a mathematically inaccurate statement.
It is obvious that women who have children are going to be more fulfilled.
How is
right?
that obvious? Because you said so?
No, it's not obvious because I said so. It's because when you look at all the statistics in terms of women who are choosing not to have families, they are, as the person who just sat here before you mentioned, they are suffering from more depression. They're suffering from more anxiety.
And that's not true.
Okay, it is true. It is actually true that women who are choosing their careers over starting families are finding themselves leaning more onto medicines like Xanax, anxiety-inducing medicines, and depression because they
See, right there, the fact check. But also, an interesting phenomenon that somewhat anecdotal, but I've seen evidence pointing to this, is pet ownership. More specifically, dogs and cats, but pet ownership is up, not just with women, with single people in general. Now, that might be a statistical anomaly just because if more people are single and you have the same propensity to want an animal in the home. But the anecdotal part is I have seen a lot of just anecdotal evidence that indicates to me that women in particular, because like I have a dog and a cat, but I don't really treat them like children. I treat them like a dog and a cat. Now don't get me wrong, they're not roughing it, but but things like buying strollers, buying clothes, dog jammies are a thing. Anecdotally, I do see this happening among women a lot more. Now that just might be like I'm giving myself due process here. That might just be because women are more likely to share things like that online than men, but I would like to see data on that is all I'm saying.
Suspended that time frame where women really should be looking to find a partner and to start a family because they were instead pursuing their careers.
And why are they better off?
It is a dishonest, it is totally a dishonest narrative that men and women want the same things out of life. We don't. We absolutely do not want the same things out of life. In fact, we don't even measure success the same. Men and women don't even measure success the same.
So,
okay?
but tell me how the women who are working and getting educated, why are they faring off better in all of these?
I am telling you that I do not believe they are faring off better in all of these measures.
Because of what?
I am telling you that we are looking at totally opposite statistics. Like, so you're saying.
She's already answered that question. Just because you don't agree with her, but like what you would want to do in this case is you would want to find the statistics, which Jubilee provided the fact check for. But if you're in a debate or in a discussion, rather, and both of you are operating off of different premises, then you need to figure out which premise is correct.
Sitting here telling me that the statistics show that women who are working are producing better children, but I am saying that women that grow up in a two-family home where the mother stays at home are faring off better than the children who are being raised in an environment
where the women are working,
where both of the parents are
why don't
working
you
away
stay
from the home. I do get to work from home.
No, but
that's the irony.
I've watched your show. You talk about all the nannies you hire, and it's so hard to find a good nanny.
I talked about all of the nannies I hired.
Yeah, you have.
I spoke about how difficult it was to find a babysitter who knew how to cook a meal, and that's because
you don't need a babysitter. You're already. You could retire right
now. You have to let people respond to you when they're speaking.
You don't want to
respond to you when
you don't want to. You want to be working, which is great.
You're telling me what I want.
Yeah, this girl's being very disingenuous. Yeah, because it's interesting when you put words into another person's mouth and then they say, no, I never did say that. And if you can't provide the clip, then you need to be quiet because you don't have the information. Or again, this is a false, an incorrect premise once more.
So today's episode is sponsored by the Spur of the Moment podcast, everybody. Come join us every Saturday. We're going to do this. We're going to sit here. We're going to talk about the news. Time to talk about the Minecraft.
Okay.
It looks bad. We're going to talk about movies. That new Joker movie is apparently terrible, and I want to see it so badly because I hear it's awful. And we're going to make some jokes. We're going to have some laughs.
There's a lot of funny jokes in there. There's a lot of weird jokes in there. The Channing Tatum one will always make me laugh. Especially when you hear the behind the scenes stuff, like when you hear the behind the scenes story of how they just phoned them up.
We're occasionally going to have other people along for the ride.
A really fun fact though is I learned last year that that Coraline was Leica and not Disney.
Oh, interesting. I mean, I can see why you would make that mistake. Yeah. Because it does seem like it's a different. And to be fair,
that would be a horrifying, terrible Disney movie.
It would be because yeah. And we're just gonna have a generally good time. Jordan, do you have anything else you want to say about our podcast? Make people watch it.
We watch movies. Sometimes we watch shows, but we always have fun.
Here
on the spur. Three, 2, 1. On the spur of the podcast moment.
Yeah, we nailed it. Nailed the podcast.
Yeah.
It's Spur of the Moment podcast every Saturday. We nailed it.
You can expect awesome content like that.
We cut flawless promos every single week.
You're telling me what I want now and then accusing me of telling you.
Wait, you don't want to work?
Can you just let me finish? Because you've said so many words that what you're trying to do here, like your argument style, is I'm going to say so much and not let her get a word in and then walk away and feel like I've won. We're not having a conversation because you've not letting me respond to even one of your points. Okay.
I can't believe I'm agreeing with Candace Owens, but yeah, she just hit the nail on the head. And like I said numerous times, this is why I really don't care for Jubilee, particularly Surrounded, but some of their other formats, because it doesn't incentivize, and online discourse in general, because it doesn't incentivize a good faith debate. It incentivizes going viral. And how you typically see that done is by talking over the other person and quote unquote overwhelming them, so that unfortunately, particularly to the untrained eye, they look stupid and look like they can't answer your question when really you're just overpowering the debate. And if you escalate, then you look like you're difficult. And this is a style that's used predominantly with people who are more left leaning, but I've seen some conservative people do it as well. Although I will just say on a balanced probabilities, a conservative debater is more likely to show a little bit more respect unless they're objecting to a specific point, right? But unfortunately, this sort of behavior is incentivized. And I guarantee you, she is trying to get a viral moment just like that smarmy mouth little shit from the Jordan Peterson video. And unfortunately, she will probably get it.
Are you
know what I
spending
mean?
as much time with your children as you possibly can? Because that's the way to get the most fulfillment.
No, and that's what I'm trying to say. I am speaking to you
So
as...
then stop.
Okay, could you please let somebody get in
I
a
did.
word
I
edgewise?
let you finish.
You're not.
I
You
did.
actually have not let anybody
I have.
finish.
I
And like I said,
absolutely have.
it's
It was less than 2, not even a minute. I think it was less than a minute that she let Candace talk before she interrupted again. So no, you're not letting her get a word in edgewise.
no one benefits when you're just speaking over me and not allowing me to respond. All you're proving is that you have an attitude and you
Okay,
believe
can you
in
address the
feminism,
point now?
but you're not. That's what I'm saying. You just have an attitude, and it's not
Trying
cute.
to-
It's performative.
I'd love if
I'm
you
actually
address my point. I will be quiet if you address my point.
Does anybody actually feel here that I am being allowed to address any of her points when she
$5 says she won't let her make her point.
just
Yes,
keeps running
yes.
over me? Like I'm literally trying to answer
Everybody
your
said yes.
first point of you saying that I don't stay at home.
Yeah,
Fair
that was
point.
really weird. Yeah.
Fair point. Obviously, I get that you're all anti-Candace and pro-feminist, but also it's not productive if you're not actually...
Okay, address the point. You spend more time saying that I'm not addressing, that you don't have a chance to talk. I mean, the whole time you could have addressed the point. You
Okay.
could have talked.
I
So go for it.
just want you to know.
No, she couldn't have because you were talking over her.
That you're not coming across as somebody who wants to actually have a conversation. So to get back to the claim, because I don't even know where you're at. You're now talking, you're saying that I said stuff in my podcast.
I'll go wherever you want to
that
go.
I never said.
I'll go wherever
So do you want
wanna
to
go.
start with me working at home? Because I work at home. You just said something about me working
You
at home.
travel all around the world.
Okay,
you do speeches, and I love that. I love how ambitious you are. That's a really great trait. And if you were truly said that, you would be more fulfilled. Now, one thing you do find is women, they don't want to stay at home when you pull them. They just want flexible working hours and flexible working conditions like you have. And I think we should all advocate for that. It's not one or the other. But when you sit here and you go, you'll be more fulfilled doing this and spend all your time doing that, we would love for you to leave the public eye and go focus on what makes you fulfilled.
Okay.
And there it is. And unfortunately, it's gonna work. She's gonna get more followers and more views because she'll be the girl online that owned Candace Owens.
My next claim is that we live under a matriarchy, not a patriarchy.
Wow. Remember earlier when I was talking about subjective definitions? This whole part of this conversation, I probably won't even comment that much because it's just going to be each person on either side of the table is going to be arguing on what their perception of our society is and even their perception of the definition of what a patriarchy is, which is simply just because patriarchy comes from the patriarch, which, I mean, in the simplest terms, is just the male head of a family or group, right? So if a society is a patriarchy, definitionally, it is run by a man or men. And if it is a matriarchy, then it is run by a woman or women. You cannot, in good faith, say that our society is a matriarchy, but I don't think it's as cut and dry to say that it's a straight up patriarchy. But it is also worth noting that in the entire history of this country, there has never been a female president. There have, however, been female senators and female members of Congress and female Supreme Court justices, but it's a minority basis in a population that, and I'm not advocating for equalization like across like 50-50, but it's just really hard to say that it's a matriarchy just observationally. But let's get into this can of worms.
Hi.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Princella, the Queen Maker.
Love that.
So you say we live in a matriarchy.
Right.
Can you give me the definition of patriarchy?
Yes. Well, the patriarchy is the idea that the system, our system in America, is being run by men, and that women are having to exist under a system that immediately disadvantages them because men are behind it. And I disagree with that pointedly. I think actually we're living in a society where people are being very much influenced socially and politically by women.
Okay, so the denotative definition of patriarchy is father rule, and where positions of government are held majorly by men, where women are largely excluded. So 125 House of Representatives are female, and that's only about 25%.
Right.
And only about 28% make up Senate, and 3.3% of Congress up until this date have ever been women. So by denotative definition, we literally live in a patriarchy.
Yes.
This is exactly what I thought. So she's not wrong in terms of the numbers, obviously, but and this is the problem when you look at the history in the broad sense, because for a vast majority of the time, women were excluded from these positions. Now they are no longer excluded, at least under law. Now there may be some preferential voting, but it goes back to the whole thing: is this problem systemic, cultural, or indicative of other things? It's too broad of a category. Like I often made the joke that when Hillary Clinton ran for president, the Democrats had found the one person on planet Earth that was more disliked than Donald Trump. And that was until they found Kamala Harris. I can only speak for myself because I can't read minds. Um, I did not vote for either one of those women because of their platforms and their ideas. It had nothing to do with the fact that they were women. I have often actually said that I don't know if it's been a minute since I've heard her speak on anything. I think the Republicans should have run Condoleezza Rice at some point. I think she would have done way better. I think Tulsi Gabbard might be up for a higher, maybe a VP pick. She did just now join the Republican Party. I was It's interesting how representation goes out the window, though. I'll use the Democrats as an example because I just said Tulsi Gabbard. It's interesting how this idea of representation goes out the window when it's someone that they don't like. Like Tulsi Gabbard, according to the Democratic apparatus, was never treated unfairly or smeared in any way because she said things that the party platform didn't like. But had it been different circumstances, it would have been because she was a woman. So this is a tough nut to crack, because I think if you're talking about in terms of percentages, the United States is a patriarchy, but to say that the entire power structure is run exclusively by men at the expense of women, I just don't see how you can say that when you can make the case that representationally it's more of a patriarchy, but there are no laws on the books saying that women cannot be members of Congress, they can't be they can't be, congresswomen, they can't be senators. They can certainly be all those things because they are. And there's no law saying that a woman can't be a Supreme Court justice because there are and have been. There's no law saying that a woman can't be president. They just haven't won an election yet. Now, over the broad spectrum of our history, they were barred from these positions, right? But as of right now, I don't think you can make the case that our society is a patriarchy insofar as it operates to the exclusion of women. Representationally, like I said, I think you can make that argument, but I don't think you can make the argument that it's a patriarchy in the sense that it operates with the goal of the exclusion of women.
When we're talking about government and media, these are two different things. So, under the denotative definition of a patriarchy, by the percentages that are occupied in the government, which is majority male, defines us as a patriarchy. Now, what it comes to for capitalism, for marketing purposes and control, for capital and revenue, that is a totally different conversation. But who's making the laws? I don't think that women are the ones voting to have their reproductive rights taken away, where you have rape, incest, and all of these things excluded to force women to be able to have. I don't think women in government would largely vote against their own interests.
I think that's a false equivalency, because there absolutely are women in government who voted against these things. Again, I don't think that's a gender thing. I think that's what would I say? That's not a morality thing. What am I trying to say? That's just a different set of priorities. It's a different value system. They're different values. Again, I'm not saying that's inherently incorrect. it's lacking a lot of data. And I think it's very easy to look at something like that and falsely extrapolate that simply because you might hold a certain belief that you cannot fathom how another woman, or in my case, like another man, would agree with something, but that doesn't mean that they don't. And if that's an issue you want to solve, and both sides do this, if it's an issue you truly want to solve, you got to find out what's actually causing those things to happen, or at the very least, understand what's really going on so that you can find a way to either find a compromise or change some views.
Are women allowed to vote?
Oh, of course they are.
Who's voting that patriarchy, and then out of curiosity?
No, I totally agree. And you want to know why? Because there are so many women who think like you. You submit to the idea of men ruling everything. And your ideology is spread across a lot of women who also falsely believe to vote against their own interests just to complain about it in the end. Earlier you said that, women would be much more happier working at home, but don't you agree that it's human nature to want things that you don't have? Mm-hmm. So during the 1950s, which is something that you constantly bring up, it wasn't until 1994 that it was legally illegal to beat your wife. And so what we're dealing with is people wanting something, and then when they get it, they're not happy with it, and then they have to revoke that idea for something else. And so what you're saying is that women vote for these things because they have the same mentality as you.
I'm not really sure the point that she was trying to make there as a whole. But once again, I meant to point this out earlier, and I didn't because I was focused on something else. The argument that she's making is what I said at the outset is, and it's funny because the arguments will change based upon what angle and what definition they need, right? This is going to be the case for Candace too, by the way. I can already see it coming. But so when she wants to argue against patriarchy, she uses the definition of, representation, or like statistics of how many women versus how many men percentage wise are in the government apparatus. But if she wants to go from a different angle, she's going to use the definition of patriarchy as, the more traditional power structure that's male dominated with the goal of the exclusion of women. So
are still existing mentally, even with the freedom to vote.
Correct.
They are voting men in because we are still victims of...
No, I don't believe in victimhood. I believe in lack of education and lack of knowledge, because one of the things that you also say...
Do you think that it could just be that more men are running for positions of office?
No, not necessarily. Because remember, the United States, the average reading comprehension of people in the United States is 6th grade. So we're not dealing with educated people. Lack of education is the cause for what we see in the world. And if we educate the women better, because a nation can rise no higher than its woman, and if she reading and comprehending at a 6th grade level and popping out a lot of kids, because the brokest people in the world pop out the most kids. So if we have those people voting, of course they're going to vote against their interests because they're voting for some utopian society that will never exist.
Okay, so that's why you think Kamala lost.
Mm-hmm. This ain't even about Kamala.
Because you're talking about women. No, but we had an opportunity.
Yeah, go ahead.
We had a male running and we had a female running. And we actually showed that Trump increased the amount of women who voted for him, right? So I'm asking you, do you believe that the reason that happened was because women became less educated during that time?
They've always been less educated. Did you know that UNESCO says that
I think that's accurate. I'm pretty sure that women actually just statistically perform better than their male counterparts at both from all levels, just statistically. I'd want to see numbers on that, but I'm pretty sure that women just achieve more statistically. And I'm not talking about the extreme ends, because that would depend on the field. But I think just generally in academics, I think women are higher achieving statistically. So might want to refocus that premise if I'm right. But like I said, I don't have the numbers, but I would like to see the numbers.
That 2/3 of the 7.7 million illiterate adults is women, illiterate, and we have 6th grade.
Oh, never mind. Okay, I stand corrected. They gave me really, really. I wonder why that is. I truly do wonder why that is.
Grade educated people voting. And guess who? Guess the dominant population is white women. And so guess what? Now you have to add a race element into that, which you already know exists. Because we, as black folks, we ain't the dominant people voting people in. Okay, so now when we have to go into white supremacy and feminism, now you have to look at the mind of the people who actually have economic success and what they're voting for, because classism actually matters as well. So I'm sorry, but a lot of people vote based on their feelings and not based on policy.
Pause, guys.
Yeah. Okay. That shifted real quick. And it's kind of a shame she got voted out, because she's making a point that I actually did a blog post on not that long ago on rtamedia.org. In fact, I think it's the most recent blog post, about basically one of the things I talked about is who actually is more influential in politics. And it turns out it's actually the middle class, and they tend to vote for things that benefit them. So it's not the extreme rich or the extreme poor. It tends to be like the middle and upper middle class that influence politics the most, because they have per capita more funds and ability to be involved in politics, but they also have a larger number. So they effectively vote for policies and politicians that are more favorable to them. So she's making a solid point here based on a concept that is just factually, and you can back this up with statistics, with numbers, right? Yeah, it's a shame she got voted out, because she was making such a great point. She was making a legitimately good point. And after that fact check, her point, I reverse the criticism. She's making solid points. She's making solid points based on, because she's not necessarily saying that it's a classist structure. I mean, she is, but she's not making that the sole reason, but she's adding different layers of nuance onto the root of the problem of her premise, being that the problem is a lack of education as to why certain people are voting against their own interests. And as you add on those layers of nuance, the picture begins to become clearer. So it's a shame she got voted down.
So let's get into the reasons, because you brought up something that men are the people that are at the top of these companies, these Fortune 500 companies.
Right. And political power.
You're absolutely right. Why is that?
It's primarily because the women haven't broken the ceiling quite yet in terms of meeting men in terms of parity with these sort of powers. But what we've seen with the explosion of feminism is that women have actually begun to enter these companies, have risen into both political and economic positions of power. But that continues to grow year by year, which shows that these social pressures are actually breaking apart as soon as feminism comes into play.
So what I would say is what that shows you is that women and men have different interests. And I think this gets into what I was saying, that just because you see a disparity does not mean that it's not just a disparity in what our interests are. That's what's being represented. I don't know why there has been this idea that women should want to aspire to work 80 hours a week in order to be on par with men.
Do you think that interests are innate, or do you think
I
that
think the interests are innate.
So why is it then that, for example, in the 1980s, only a quarter of college graduates were women, where now majority of college graduates are women? That shows that because of the way that social pressures have actually changed, women's interests are actually now changing too.
I'm not saying he's wrong, I want to preface, but the danger of his argument that he's not seeing is that if you're making the claim that there were, and to a point still are, social pressures keeping women from going into these fields, being politics, law, in these different career fields and options, you also have to accept at least the possibility that feminism as a cultural force is pushing women into these fields because there's a feeling that they have to, even though I'm not saying women don't want to. I'm just saying you have to explore the possibility that some women may feel the pressure to go into these fields because feminism as a cultural force exists and puts pressure on women. Whether or not they respond to it is up to them, true. But much like he's making the case for, cultural forces, which I do think exist, right? I'm not saying he's wrong. I think it depends on the person, though, is what I'm getting at. So if I were Candace, I would jump on the fact that it's like, okay, well, if you're postulating the idea of cultural pressures affecting women wanting to go into these fields and maybe making them feel like they can't or shouldn't, then you also have to accept at least the possibility that feminism can push women in the opposite direction.
81% of women have been sexually assaulted, 1 in 6 have been raped, 1 in 4 women are the victims of domestic violence, 98% of perpetrators of rape and sexual assault are men, 95% of perpetrators of domestic violence are men. In regards to human trafficking, 70% of human trafficking victims are women. So we're seeing a very clear issue of men being violent towards women. And then when we look at the way that our government handles that, 1 out of 3 rapes go reported. And then out of the ones that go reported, 7% end in jail time. So if we're looking at that and we're looking at the fact that our government doesn't really get that worried about male violence.
Well, so what I would say is, going back to biological differences, men are naturally inclined more towards aggression than women are. So I am not shocked by you telling me. It's, even if you looked at, like I said, male on male crime, you would see that there are more instances of men killing other men than there are instances of women killing other women. And that, I think, actually speaks to our biological differences, which is actually at the root of everything that I believe about feminism being a lie, is because they're trying to program people to believe that men and women are the same. Now, I don't think that pointing to the fact that men are more aggressive than women, which is a point that you and I 1000% agree on, whether or not that manifests in the very wrong way, men harming other men, which I think they do more probably than they are beating women, men on male violence.
Okay, so this part may not stay in the video. We'll see, but if you're hearing it, I guess you'll know. So about what Candace just said there, just that gave me a bit of the ick. So I don't think anybody can logically. Okay, this part might not be in the video, but if you're hearing me say that, then obviously it is in the video. What Candace just said there, I don't think you can logically argue that male on male violence is more common than male on female violence, simply because, like, again, I don't know the numbers, but just logically speaking, if you have someone of any gender looking to perpetrate violence on someone, they're going to more than likely choose a victim that they're pretty sure that they can dominate and overpower. So I don't think you have too many people victim hunting looking for a fair fight. But what the other girl said, which is a very good point, but there's a phenomenon that happens with most of the time people that are on the right side, where they sort of, how do I want to say, they sort of want to de-emphasize the numbers and how common sexual assault actually is perpetrated against women. Now, I don't have the numbers. The number that's often talked about in parlance in this sort of setting is 1 in 4. Now, there's this thing that happens, and I kind of want to. I'm going to use a different word. I'm going to use as an example. I'm going to use the word casualties. So when you're talking about historical conflict, i.e., war, the word casualties is often misunderstood. It's often misunderstood to mean deaths, when in reality, casualties definitionally is just anyone who is removed from combat. And that can be for any reason, but typically that's injury or illness, and death is a part of that. But this thing happens where casualties, like I said, is often definitionally misunderstood to only mean deaths. So it gives an inaccurate view of what happened. And what I often see happen, or at least I perceive happen in parlance like this, is people, again, who typically lean right, try to sort of de-emphasize this idea, because I will agree, they don't want to de-emphasize, I'm sorry, they misunderstand definitionally what sexual assault means, and they kind of automatically assume that it means rape, and this is not everyone, but this is something I've seen happen, right? And rape is included in that sexual assault umbrella, but it's not exclusive, right? So when you take that into account, that 1 in 4 number starts to feel a lot more accurate. Wow, had a point. So yeah, the point I'm making is that if you're looking at, and I don't have these numbers, I have no idea, because as it was pointed out, a large number of rapes go unreported. However, anecdotally, and this is something that I kind of got woken up to, is there's it's an alarming number of women that I've just met in my lifetime. Family members, past relationships, just people that I've gotten to know. The number of women that I've met in my life that have been assaulted in some way, not necessarily, although I've the number of rape victims astounds me that I've just personally come in contact with. So that 1 in 4 number doesn't seem extreme to me anymore. It did at one point, but that was pure ignorance. It's alarming. It's a problem. It's a big problem, and I think the right does a disservice to themselves and to women by dismissing it, or at least de-emphasizing it. So I'm glad she pointed out those numbers because, like I said, I don't have the actual statistics, but it all sounds right.
Because what I'm talking about when I say that we're existing under a matriarchy is that I believe that the social pressures politically and socially that are coming, and even within our music, if we talk about Hollywood, it's very much
that
has
power
become
means nothing. Like, just because like who was on the top music charts or whatever are women, okay, how many women have paid maternity leave?
Okay, that's not
like how are things panning out in the family courts? Why are abusive men having
more women have paid maternity leave than men have paid paternity leave?
Can we go back to the male violence question?
Yes.
Why does our country not persecute men then who are rapists?
Well, the majority of people who are in prison are men, so I don't know what you mean that we don't prosecute men that are rapists. We even prosecute people.
7% go to jail. Only 7% go to jail.
I don't know what that has to do with the question of whether or not we're living in a matriarchy or a patriarchy.
Because our
if
government
there's an
I'd want to see those numbers because on the surface, I don't believe that only 7% of rapists go to jail. But if that's true,
preferential to men.
You're saying that they only like to arrest men when they kill someone, but our government is awarding men for raping women. I don't understand what
they're not. They don't care. Rape is effectively legal. You can literally rape a woman, and you have a very low likelihood of actually going to jail.
Okay, no, that's disingenuous at best and horribly at worst. Now, that 7% figure, probably, now that I think of it, that 7% figure probably includes, how do I word that? That 7% figure probably includes rapes that go unreported. I would venture to guess, because that seems extremely low but again, if you include unreported crime, all crime statistics, all incarceration rates go down when you include crimes that go unreported, but you can't accurately reflect, because again, if it's not reported, how do we know? But yeah, that's rape being effectively legal. Come on.
Hi, Adam. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. So your
get ready to get mansplained again.
Claim is, just to be clear, that we live in a matriarchy, right?
Yes.
So I think even you'd agree that on a global level, that's obviously ridiculous when there are countries where people literally are honor killed for like Instagram posts. But even if we're talking about just the US, right? We don't have paid maternity leave. Abortion is illegal in over a dozen different states. And as someone earlier,
we don't have paid paternity leave either. Not government mandated paid paternity leave.
We just have a fundamental disagreement on
sure,
whether or
then
not
we can
a child
talk
is a
about
life.
paid maternity leave. People have been talking a lot about whether you have to be a mother, you have to work. A lot of women have to pick one or the other because in many cases, if you want to have a child, first of all, there's a big gap in your resume, so getting a job after that might be super difficult. And then secondly, even in the process of having that child, being pregnant, especially in the 3rd trimester, and then raising the child where the vast majority of the burden typically is on the mother, the workplace and our system of our economy is not tailored to make that easy for them.
I actually totally agree with you. And this gets
Paid
into
maternity leave, you
this.
agree?
I don't know. Actually, I'm agreeing with you that this pressure that you're describing exists for women, and I'm saying that it exists for women because of the feminists that came before who argued for women to enter the workplace. So what you're saying is the solution didn't work, and it actually produced more problems.
So I'm just going to interrupt here and talk about something that I don't think either one of these people is going to talk about, because he's got a point, but I don't believe the prescription is government mandated maternity leave. I think the solution is actually more supporting small businesses because, funnily enough, um, own a small business, and I've never had a pregnant woman. I'm the grammar. I've never had a pregnant woman working for me, but I have had women with small children work for me. And funny things happen when you work for a small business is when you know your company owner on a first name basis and you know his or her face, I'm not saying it is a family, but it's much more like a family. And at least there should be, and there certainly is in my company. There's just more of an understanding when it comes to family needs. And certainly, and I can speak for myself in this level, um, if I had a customer who was pregnant, depending on their level in the company, something would be figured out to either make their lives easier, to, provide them with time off. And in some cases, and I would love to, if the business was successful enough, I would love to provide paid time off, but it just sort of depends. But I think the solution to this is more focus on small businesses as job creators, because these giant corporations truly don't give a shit about you. And if they can avoid paying you for not being at work, even if you have a legitimate medical issue or pregnancy or anything, they're going to do it. So I think supporting small businesses is a much better way to address this problem rather than just mandating that, because these mandates will hurt some small companies and they won't be able to be there to provide, any sort of relief. Although I suppose you could make the argument that if everybody works for these giant corporations, but the government says you have to grant them maternity leave, trust me, they'll find ways around it because they always do.
Be able to tackle these problems. So
Well,
you're
any
like,
system
you
that's
need the
forcing
government.
women to make certain decisions, I just wouldn't
It's
call
not
that
forcing
feminism
women
to
to
begin
make-
with.
it's not
Women should have the
forcing-
option to choose: do I want to be a stay-at-home mom? Do I want to work? Do I have some mix of both?
Right.
That's the entire point here.
But you are also making an argument.
They do have the freedom to make that choice, but there are just actual real world considerations. Like, it's not a utopia. There are considerations, financial, preferential, all those things.
Argument that if you are a woman who does run a business and does have employees, that they should be forced to pay them maternity leave.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so let me
That's
tell
like
you.
saying taxes are forced. Yeah, there's certain things the government does to regulate our economy to ensure equality and justice and
Okay.
better outcomes.
Okay,
Yeah.
but just so you know, when you do that, like to a small business
every
owner,
other developed country does.
What you are arguing for is supporting big corporations and taking out the little guys because
I'm arguing for supporting people that want to be mothers and also work at the same
right,
time.
the
mechanism we do that with.
But the money has to come from somewhere. That's the thing. If we all just crap money, none of us would work anyway.
It can be
But
subsidies, taxes.
You guys can't just keep this. You can't say that we can't have the economic. We can't get down to the economics of what it actually implies, right?
I have an economics degree, and I can tell you if there's a small business that can't afford to pay maternity leave,
Right.
the government would probably subsidize them and help cover the costs.
Where is the government getting money from?
Really? The government? You think the government's going to subsidize a small business? Really? Holy fuck. Do you know if you actually break down my business's number one expense, if you break that out into a category, you know what that expense is? It's fucking taxes. It's obscene how many taxes when you and again, this is slightly unfair because you're climbing on, I'm not even going to include sales tax because that is theoretic. That's indirectly paid for by the consumer. We're talking, depending on your company structure, you have to consider your income tax, your sales tax on anything that you buy for the business, unless you're tax exempt. But then there's a whole thing you have to do. You end up paying for it at some point or another. Payroll taxes, your share of FICA, your Social Security, your share of unemployment taxes, workman's comp, it's absolutely fucking insane. Tax preparation, bookkeeping, but I'm not even going to include that because that's stacking the deck. Like, taxes are the number one expense. So the fact that this guy thinks, of course he has an economics degree. You'd have to have an economics degree to say something so fucking stupid. You think the government subsidizes huge businesses. The government does not subsidize small businesses. In fact, a lot of their policies seem as though they're trying to actively kill the small business.
My final claim is that feminism has made things easier for men.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Jenny.
Candace.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
You said that feminism is easier for men, or is
It's made things, I think, easier in
things
society
easier
for
for
men.
men.
Yeah. Now men don't have to commit, and they're being offered sex from women for free. So they have to actually effectively do less and be motivated less, because feminism has kind of insisted on this culture of sex and hooking up. And I think that has been a net negative for women.
On good faith, I just want to say, I think you're approaching this with like the best interest for women. Like, you think that is negative for women and harmful. And I think in some aspects we can agree to that.
I got to choose my words carefully on this one. I think insofar as if you're arguing that hookup culture is a byproduct of feminism, which I think you can, I think you can maybe make that case. I think she's right, but that's not to say that I don't think that necessarily hookup culture was an inevitability. I think in our culture it certainly became a thing, but I don't think that feminism in a vacuum like definitively always leads to that. So like they're connected, but I don't think they're the same thing. All right, we're almost there, and I got so into this I forgot to tell you about the second sponsor of today's video, that being Arte Media. But specifically, let's say that you're watching this video and you thought to yourself, hey, look at this idiot. I can do this. Well, guess what? You can, and we'll even help you do it for free. All you need to do is click the second link in the description, takes you to artemedia.org, artemedia.org's contact form, sends an email directly to moi, and we can help you get your podcast off the ground. Or if you have a show that exists, we can just help you cross promote it. You can join our little podcast network. We're trying to grow up to 50 podcasts. We are currently sitting at 17, and we're looking for new shows to add to the network. So if you're thinking to yourself, I've got an idea for a podcast, and case in point, even a trained chimp can do it. Well, what's stopping you? You have no excuse. Click that link and get started on your show today.
I would like to understand why, again, you think that men benefit from feminism more?
Basically, because men don't have to commit to women. Men are still able to do what they're doing, and they are allowed to basically step away from all of the responsibilities of what it really meant to be a man and lead a household. And that's in large part, I think, due to the sexual revolution.
I mean, is it really bad that we don't have to give men the chase? Don't they have gratification from chasing us? Like, it's a hunter versus prey situation to me. So I feel like a lot of relationships, especially back then, were based on trying to get to home run like very fast. And now that we have the freedom to not commit and not tie ourselves to one man for the rest of our life, I just don't necessarily think that's bad. I just don't think the revolution has decreased our value. We're not chewed gum. We're people who value connection.
I don't think you're not making the point you think you're making. Wow, that's so Candace's point is that men are benefiting from feminism because they don't have to commit to women to get sexual access at its most basic level. They don't have to adhere to the responsibilities of running a household, committing, basically. And your argument is that because women have the freedom to not be tied down to someone, that somehow makes them that somehow makes women more chaste more, because you use the phrase chase, which from a feminist kind of is shocking to hear. And you even use the word hunter and prey. So that's an interesting turn. But yeah, you're not making the point you think you're making.
And sex doesn't always have to have this deep meaning. It is just connection and intimacy between two people who trust each other. And why do we have to deny women that gratification? Like men, you say that are wired to want that. Why not women? Why?
Well, we again, I go back to just our basic biological differences. There was a really interesting book that was done by a biophysicist. He, I think, recently passed away, named Edward O. Wilson, where he just sort of breaks down the biological arguments. Basically, he looks in the wild to see the behavior of animals. His thesis is just that you basically can never beat your own biology. And then he kind of compares it to what we see here as just.
Hey, I hate this argument that everybody always makes. It's yes, biology is a thing, but what makes us human? Our ability to control our impulses and reason. This argument is so flawed, and I really wish people would stop using it. Because by virtue of that logic, then taken to its absurd extreme, then rape is not a crime, it is a biological impulse that we cannot help. And taking outside of the realm of sexuality, humans, generally speaking, have an impulse to consume a lot of food, particularly food that's not particularly good for us, because our bodies are designed to keep resources. That's why we crave sweet things. That's why we crave sugar, because if we were wild animals, we would not come across these things very often. So that's why our body is geared to store fat for later, because wild animals, particularly carnivores, statistically don't have a high success rate when hunting. So the biology argument, not even considering the fact that we have the ability to reason, I hate this argument so much.
We're not sockeye salmon. We're not made to breed and have families and then die.
You are welcome to do that. I'm just saying that when it comes time for you to find a partner, you may find yourself in a circumstance where men don't value you as high, because men like you spoke to, men like to compete. They like to feel like they've won something.
I'd like to deprive men of that because they don't need to have that. Sure. That's actually
But you did bring up.
Yeah, and that's what you say, that men are, essentially predatory, and we have the goods that we have to keep from them.
Oh, I didn't mean the goods in a bad way.
Actually, you said that. You said that earlier.
But that's such an objectifying way, the goods, the grocery goods.
Honestly, I think that that's just kind of
we don't have value
colloquial
in value
songs
in
today.
Soul.
I think
we have value apart from how many people we sleep with, how many, you also devalue education for women. And I think that's very interesting because you're also a very educated woman. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of ways, this is just like an observation. You devalue yourself a lot.
I definitely do not feel like I'm devaluing myself.
Make him a sandwich?
Yeah. Yes, which is the title of my book.
Yes, feed your men and everything. Feed the people that you love. Because family isn't defined just by your...
That's the point she's making. What you literally just said, feed the people that you love. That's what she's fucking saying. And also, don't knock sandwich making. Subway pays okay money for sandwich artists. I actually don't know what Subway pays, but people work there and they make sandwiches.
Partner or your kids, family is community, and you should care about your community. And understanding that, I just don't think you really care about the community that much when you're pushing this rhetoric of devaluing women so much to stay in the kitchen, stay within the homes.
Okay, just because she brought up the sandwich thing, I have to say this. I say this often. I don't know for sure if I think I've said this on the podcast before, but I really hate that whenever there's this discussion of feminism, it always comes down to cooking, right? It's such a dumb argument because, okay, I'll use my house as an example. So my fiance, who will be my wife in less than 2 weeks, she's a significantly better cook than I am. It's just a fact. Everyone enjoys her food more than mine. That being said, I can cook. I'm just not as good at it. And on days that she works late, guess who will cook? And will have zero problem with it. And I have said, this is the part that I think I've said before on this podcast. Um, Here's the thing. This is where I'm going to piss off the men that think I'm like agreeing with them. If you are an adult, particularly an adult in your 30s, right? If you're and I don't care what gender you are, if you're living on your own and you are incapable of cooking a meal, I think Candace brought this up earlier, but particularly like these men in their 30s and 40s that are like always insistent on make me a sandwich. Like, can you not make one? Like, I get it. I get where the argument can go, because like, but I would make my wife a sandwich. Like, and that doesn't make me a beta. It's just you can't put meat and cheese on bread. Like, I'm sorry, not sorry. If you're a man and if you're an adult and you can't prepare a meal, you're less than useless. Like, how do you feed yourself? Do you just order takeout all the time? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, you're an adult. You should be able to cook, if for no one else, for yourself. Now, flipping that script, my fiance loves cooking for me, her family. She loves to cook. It is a thing that she likes to do. And she loves cooking a meal and watching everyone enjoy it. It seems to be me in particular. She often feeds me too much. That's a separate issue. But this idea that you're inherently anti-feminist if you like cooking for your husband is ridiculous.
So you keep talking about OnlyFans and Kim Kardashian, and well, I do OnlyFans.
Okay.
Oh, that's why. Sorry, I did the microphone thing again. But that right there, that right there is why you got to be careful when you hit pause. But what I said was, I think Candace has only brought up OnlyFans like once in this conversation, but I think she might be referring to in general.
I am going to choose Jenny to have a further conversation with because I thought that it was a respectful dialogue and I want people to be able to learn from the differences. And I think she is probably the best equipped person to get that done.
My claim is that I believe feminism is wrongly interpreted as anti-men when it benefits both men and women.
It's a great claim. I like that claim.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think that claim is going to be it. Here's the unfortunate thing. It's actually a really bad. It's great for a discussion. It's a really bad claim because it can be proven or disproven depending upon who you're talking about specifically. So feminism, I'm not even going to make the argument and say that feminism isn't anti-man, but for argument's sake, I'm going to say I don't believe that feminism is anti or inherently anti-man, but to assert that there aren't any feminists that just despise men is just dishonest. And feminist arguments are often used in ways that intentionally or otherwise come off as anti-male. For example, and I'm not saying this is true or false, but the use of the term patriarchy in feminist discussions always has a negative connotation. And what that says, again, saying without saying it, is that male control, that any sort of control over a society or structure by men is an inherently bad thing. Well, as usual, and like I did in the previous video, I'm not going to go over this part of the conversation because it was actually quite good and civil, and I recommend that you watch the original video and you can just enjoy it for yourself. You don't need my commentary over the last bit because it's a good, productive discussion. So that was my reaction to Candace Owens on Surrounded. I'm going to be honest. I thought I was going to be disagreeing with Candace a lot more, but true to form with these Jubilee videos, the 20 people they have surrounding are a combination of people who don't know how to argue or people that are just generally speaking with one or two exceptions, people that are just slaves to their ideology and will construct an argument to make their ideology work rather than constructing good logical arguments outside of a fixed ideology. So, but stay tuned because coming up, I'm not going to say next week, but soon enough, I will be reacting to another Jubilee video. But this time, I have a feeling that I'm going to be reacting strongly to the people who are surrounding. But if you have not already, please like, share, and subscribe. Subscribe to the channel. And please, I am asking very nicely, go back and watch some of our older episodes. We're trying to get our watch time up so we can get monetized and we can create more content for you guys. So this has been the Average Intelligence Podcast. Hopefully you're a little bit less average and a little bit more intelligent. But if the chimp in the suit didn't give it away, sorry.